So welcome everyone, welcome Daniel. I'm really glad that this meeting is happening. I was basically waiting for the meeting for 1 year because it was supposed to happen at the end of the first study group related to the book of Daniel, Designing Regenerative Cultures. But things are as they are, and I'm very glad that we are meeting nowadays, 1 year later, at the end of the study process of the second group that was going through Daniel's book. Daniel, I'm not going to introduce you because, as I already mentioned, we all know you. You have been an inspiring companion for all of us in the last months. We have been meeting on a weekly basis, going through your book chapter by chapter. Plus, we did some offshoots. For example, we dived deeper into Wilbur, etc. And right now we are switching into the second phase of the whole process, which is going to be focusing on designing regenerative projects. It is framed in a very similar way as it is familiar to you from Gaia Education, but I added 2 extra steps. After people complete their kind of broad civilizational or cultural vision of the theme they would like to address, I invited them to imagine that first they are someone who has a significant political power to realize that theme or that vision on a systemic level, for example, mayor or prime minister, anything between these hierarchical levels. Because I think that this broadens and deepens the scope of thinking of what these regenerative projects could achieve, because they are basically seeds. And if the seed is supposed to unfold really into its full glory and splendor, it is good to have really this type of magnitude. That imagine that we are somebody like this. How would we do this? What kind of trigger points we would try to activate? And the second step, it's very similar, but imagine that political representatives, they are not very welcoming regenerative vision, which is, of course, the reality of our world mostly. How we would bypass that blockage, how we would create really broad alliances in the domain of cultural creatives, just to make your vision of systemic significance. And only after that, people will start to work on their concrete projects that are localized in the areas where they are living. But I think that they will have few extra layers that might be helpful in creating alliances, not only in the human world. I think that a vision of this type is very prone to catch attention of the cosmos itself, and the cosmos itself, if it falls in love with that vision, it will conspire to make it happen. At least that was that intention. But I thought that maybe a good way to introduce you would be to ask you, what are your current regenerative projects that are kind of on your working table, that are drawing your attention, and you are really fueling them with your passion? Maybe you could speak something about this, and maybe you could focus both on Mallorca and both on worldwide activities that you are in.
Before we go there, just first, hello everybody, and lovely, and thank you, Vlado, for everything you have done with translating the book, not just into Czech, but also into Slovak. I don't think the Slovak edition is out yet. I haven't heard from Michal for a while, but yeah, also it's just in a few countries, like in Argentina and in Mexico and in Colombia. And also in Spain, people have done this, like just small groups of people reading the book together. And since it's a book that really takes some work and is quite like it's a lovely way of working with the book to actually have a community to reflect on the questions and what it does within you, and how it is meaningful in your context. And that's always nice when you can do that with a kind of national or regional cohort, because every country, every context is different. And yeah, I don't think I have, like, because you said your vision, I think it's a vision of life itself coming through us again. I wouldn't call it my vision. But coming to your question, well, first of all, checking in where am I at right now. I'm sitting in a garden shed in a Mediterranean food forest that I started to steward for the last, by now almost 5 years. I've planted 450 trees and am experimenting with how can we bring at a relatively small scale of just 1 hectare life's capacity to generate abundance into the Mediterranean climate zone without overspending on water and external inputs. And that sounds a bit like a kind of going back to my roots of a kind of permaculture hideaway. And to some extent it is, but it's also a beautiful opportunity to really do research in how to work with the modern human world and how to let regeneration as an impulse of life itself flow through oneself in kind of conversation with this land and the plants and the soil. So that's been a wonderful deepening, along with the beauty of my daughter was born just after my book came out. So the last 8 years have also been a deep learning of becoming a dad and all of that. And we're at the end of the first heat wave of this summer, which is really early. Like, I think yesterday we were the hottest place in Europe at 39 degrees. And so I'm a little bit slower and a little bit more tired today than I normally am, just to situate you there, because it's been a bit of a hot couple of days. So what do I do at the moment? I've tried, also because of being a family father and because of my reading of the current global situation, really requiring all of us to get a lot more familiar with our local context, with our local community, with our bioregion, with the living, dwelling context within which we actually have a web of analog relationships, not digital relationships, because it's a dangerous world where you think you can rely on friends all over the globe, but you need large corporations to stay in touch with them. So for me, I've tried to take that perspective seriously and have tried to regionalize my activities as much as possible. So I've just explaining my daughter why I say no to probably 18 or 19 out of 20 offers to travel somewhere at the moment. Like, I get a lot of invitations also to travel to other continents, and I just, being grounded in this place, doing the work I do with the food forest, and then working with local NGOs, trying to bring local actors in the landscape together to have a larger, more comprehensive narrative, where they see what they've been doing for years in a new context, where they can see that each and every one of them in their own way are already an expression of regeneration taking place in this territory. And that what we need to do is to weave their stories and their narratives together into a bigger story that shows that every act of caring, sharing, nurturing, healing, that celebrating biocultural uniqueness of place, weaving a network of relationships between people and between people in place, all of that is already life coming through us in its regenerative capacity. So we stop falling into this trap that right now is happening with a lot of people that sell regeneration or regenerative process or project as something new that they have some unique knowledge and access to, and let me explain you how we're going to make this regenerative project. I think it's much more powerful when we understand that life is a regenerative community at nested scales. And that's also our ally. Because if you just logically look at where we are at, we have a snowball's chance in hell to make it through this century with even just a fraction of the population on the planet. But if we align with life as a regenerative impulse, true miracles can happen. And they happen when we heal places and communities and bioregions. And because I truly believe in that, I try to live it the best I can by using the little bit of agencies I've got through my book and meeting people who are more in the philanthropic world to connect them with projects here on Mallorca, and probably managed to land maybe close to, by now, 1.5 million of funding in Mallorca in the last 5 years. Not for me, but for different organizations. Some of that money, it's a very small proportion, these organizations can then also spend on hiring me as a consultant, but the main money goes to them. And so that's pretty much one of my main activities, working with Save the Med, working with Fundación Iniciativas Mediterránea, working with another foundation called Mediterranean Wildlife Foundation, which is a beautiful project that brought back the black vulture from close to extinction on Mallorca, where it's the last island population in the Mediterranean. And by 1989, there was only one breeding pair left. And now the population is up to 400 again and 70 breeding pairs. And part of what that foundation stewards is an estate of 1,000 hectares called Ariant. And I've also been trying to help them resource that stewardship, because it actually costs a lot of money to keep up 1,000 hectares. So that's my main activity here on the island. The growing edge there is that now that my daughter is 8 and I'm beginning to feel there's more content teaching, like she's in a wonderful school, beautiful project, but I would like to work with that school and link them with Gaia Education. As you mentioned, I've worked with Gaia Education for many years, and Gaia Education has a growing project of school projects like Gaia Schools and Gaia in Schools. And I've been also helping to resource that project a bit and help Thaisa to build this Gaia Schools narrative to the point that we now really want to launch a network of schools working in this way. And to make that global work relevant and locally rooted for me, one of my growing edges is to dream into how to resource or how to find the funding to work with the school my daughter is in and to make it a Gaia school, and to look at how that process itself could then also help other schools on Mallorca to include the 4-dimensional design curriculum that is embedded in Gaia Education's work in a school curriculum. So that's one thing. And then I have the podcast that you probably all know, Regeneration Rising, the one that I do with RSA Oceania. Before I rattle on like this, can you just all sort of do a this or this with regard to your English comprehension capacity? So if I need to speak a bit slower in order for it to... Yeah. Okay. So
Daniel, I plan to, after this meeting, for those who are interested, organize another one when we go through the recording, and for those of us that do not speak English, simply translate it word by word. So don't worry, simply speak fluently and freely as you want.
But yeah, I can try to speak a little slower, and also if you really want to get a point and you didn't get it, just wave and ask the question. Like, I don't want to just keep rattling on. We're a small enough group that we can just have a conversation. So yeah, wrapping up on what else do I do? Too many things. So it's a dangerous question to ask. But snippets of you've come across the 3 horizons because they're in the book, and I've been working with Bill Sharp for many, many years, and have helped him. We both helped each other develop our thinking and the work we do for probably 10 years now. And as part of that collaboration, I helped to, like, I was initially part of a research bid of the University of York about redesigning food systems and creating a regenerative food system in Yorkshire. And out of that, a project has started that is now coming to its end, which will be publishing a kind of toolkit for bioregional regeneration activities. Just a bunch of useful exercises, methods, processes that isn't the one and all one method that you have to follow, nor the definitive set of tools, but it's a set of tools that people who want to work with communities could find useful. And so that's one of the bigger projects I'm working on that hopefully will come to fruition by the end of the summer. And then another project which is I'm really excited about is that for a while I've been dreaming into making a documentary film using the material that we have from making the RSA podcast, because we also have video and we have a lot more material that ended up in the 45-minute episodes. And there's this sort of idea of creating a very visually stunning, very engaging documentary film using some of those voices, and then mainly making people fall in love with life through a sort of Koyaanisqatsi, Pauarqatsi kind of visual feast. And out of that idea, sometimes the universe conspires in strange ways. In parallel, I was contacted by two women. One of them is a documentary filmmaker, and in the end, we ended up merging these two projects. And so now I'm working on a beautiful documentary project that is trying to bring people into a new relationship with life and themselves. So that's another big project. And yeah, trying to weave coherence among all the people that are now jumping up and down and telling people how to do bioregional regeneration, how to celebrate the multiplicity of approaches, and how to also name the caveats or the pitfalls that I see with some of these approaches without saying I'm right and they're wrong or anything, but by just making people a bit more aware that there's a sort of bioregioning path, which is very inclusive of simply people, no matter what political spectrum, if you have a deep love for place and a deep love for community and you're not completely acting outside a certain core set of values, you're bioregioning. And I might not agree with you on everything, but you're still bioregioning. There's other approaches to this which are very much more sort of bioregionalism. Every ism creates a schism. We are an alternative to the current mainstream. We're going to fight the system and we're going to do this and can do that. And I've never been a friend of polarizing. So part of the work I do internationally behind the scenes is trying to, wherever people are starting to get all competitive or peeing in the corner and marking territory as their own, I'm trying to sort of bring people together and remind them that it's not about them, but about life. That kind of stuff. And yeah, working a lot with Guy Education, like all the reboot of Guy Education with the courses with Lila June and with the bioregioning course we just finished, and now with the course with Bill Sharp on patterning of hope. That's all been sort of weaving new strength for Guy Education with the wonderful team they now have. So I'm quite excited that like it was a bit of a decision after having put a lot of my energy and care into Guy Education for the last 20 years and getting for the first 15 I got paid really poorly for it, and also not so recognized, so I was a bit burnt with that organization. But then when the CEO left that ran the organization for a long time, it was a question of, do I let it die or do I help it become a phoenix and come out of the ashes? And I think we've just managed to make it come out of the ashes again. And I did put another pretty big push of effort behind it, but I think it's worth it because it's a wonderful organization.
Thank you. From the way how you responded, I feel that I know also the response for the next question. It is basically the first question that we came with during the first opening weekend of that project design studio. Simply we are starting to ask ourselves what kind of question would we like to ask you. And this one came as first in the context that your book was published and written even more further in the past, more than 8 years ago, and many things happened in the world, both on the positive line and the negative line. And the book itself, it was simply written in a way focusing or drawing attention towards all the small and big positive things that we could make happen only if we wanted to. So it was strongly leaning towards what is possible, not so much towards what are the obstacles, what are the systemic blockages that simply are in many aspects significant. And the question is, if you were to write this book again, with all your knowledge, all your expertise, all your experience, would you write it in a different style, different manner, or simply it would be pretty much the same?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be the same if I wrote it now, but I wouldn't want to change the one that I wrote in 2016, because I made a conscious choice to, at that point, it was already an element of mind over matter to believe and manifest that there was a window of opportunity through which we could walk and still avoid cascading collapse to get to a point where it would just run away, like get worse and worse when we couldn't do anything about it. And at that point, I felt sending a hopeful message that there is still a path through the eye of the needle was more important than to preach around systemic injustices. But if you read it carefully, you will see that it's actually all those things are named briefly and hinted at. But you're absolutely right. There was a conscious focus on staying with the positive to some extent. If I wrote a book now, what would I do different? I like the one thing that I've learned is that I didn't highlight enough that we're not talking about something new, but we're talking about something very, very ancient. So to really ground regeneration, like I've since the book came out, also in conversations with Fritjof Capra, which are all recorded on my YouTube channel. I think I've strengthened the double anchor that you need with regeneration. And the double anchor is, if you don't anchor it in life itself, in the fact that it happens in every cell of our body and in our stomach lining and in our mouth lining and in our bones and in the ecosystem around us and in the social systems around us, you miss the point. And if you don't anchor the capacity to be regenerative, to be a regenerative keystone species in the ecosystems we dwell in, if we don't anchor that into our own species, into our own DNA as our birthright, and the proof that it is so is that we're still here. It is our evolutionary survival pattern to be a bioregioning species, to nurture the ecosystem we dwell in into relative states of abundance and bioproductivity, that we have a future within them. And that capacity could be increased by appropriate technology and wise land use patterns that we now understand. And so for me, anchoring these two anchors, because I remember the very first time in a webinar, mentioned this framing that really it's about aligning with life's regenerative impulse and regenerative force, and that then we have life behind us, and also that it is in us as a species. I had a beautiful commentary by one of the people on the webinar saying that reframing gave her the hope that things were still possible, because it wasn't a human, oh, we're all change makers and we must change the system so it becomes regenerative. It's more like, relax, regeneration is going to go on. And if we mess it up, life will regenerate. But there is a way that we can realign and also regenerate our own relationship with life. And so I think that bit I maybe didn't stress enough, because the amount of people out there, but it's also partially Regenesis who likes to sell it as a sort of do this course and then you know what you're talking about kind of approach that lends people to think that it's the new thing, that you need to do 15 trainings and then you can put on your LinkedIn profile regenerative this, that, and the other, and then everything becomes regenerative. And that I find a bit of a shame. Like I see a lot of well-meaning people in their different disciplines now are like understanding that they need to position design or architecture or planning or engineering in the context of regenerative cultures and regeneration. But what they actually do is to just slap the adjective regenerative on what they've been doing all along. And in doing so, they it's almost like an implosion. They implode the web of life connection that regeneration offers us into a discipline again, and into their little expertise. And then they pee in the corner to make themselves the guy who knows about regenerative engineering or regenerative design. And in the process, they break it. And it's not out of ego, it's out of frustration with humanity that I wish it were different.
And then, as you can see, we prepared all of this for you. We do not aspire to go through all those questions, but those that are darkest in green got the greatest attention or preference. So perhaps we could start with them. The first one is mine, so I will read it, and because it is a little bit longer, but then I will give the word to other people. Guys, remark, Daniel, as you see from his name, he's a German. So for those of you that it is easier to ask the question in German, you can do so. The same with Spanish. I think that you are proficient in Spanish too.
Yeah.
So these are three languages we can use so that you are more comfortable to really give voice to your question as naturally as...
Catalan as well, if you want to.
Okay, so my question is this. I struggle with it a lot, and it's like this. Developing the regenerative impulse by its very nature requires investment in a fundamental qualitative upgrade, both conceptually, experientially, etc. It also requires a robust social discourse focused on asking big questions together. I don't know how you perceive it in your cultural circles or in your cultural context, but in our Central European space, the polarization and all those tensions that are related with culture wars, especially associated with the COVID pandemic, which smoothly transitioned into the conflict in Ukraine, have deeply fragmented our society. It is so broken and torn apart, so deeply immersed in the us versus them war mentality, that it is almost impossible to find individuals, let alone platforms or communities, that have the internal capacity to create at the systemic level. The dominance of survival mode associated with the effort to preserve what one has, and strong societal antagonism largely prevents this. Are these obstacles also present in your context, or simply it is in such a strong and robust way specific for Central Europe? And how are you dealing with these tensions and opposing powers?
Super question. And of course, yes, they're everywhere. There's not a place on the world where that polarization driven by the machinery of social media and other media, and that whole narrative of them against us is just it's also like as we're already in a phase of collapse, and I don't mean that in a sense of, oh, the end of the world is here. No, there are patterns that are no longer fit for purpose, that have been maintained for centuries or for decades longer than they should have ever been maintained. And they're starting to not be functional again, and therefore they're breaking down around us, and that will always create the possibility for people to draw back into some kind of them against us thinking. But what I'm noticing is that in those places where people really, like in a kind of Arne Mindell process-oriented psychology kind of sense, are sitting in the fire of human conflict and the field dynamics of what is actually going on here, and stop personalizing every opinion into a person that has said it, and just maybe understanding that that's a voice in the field. It's somehow a perspective that needs to be voiced, and it's voiced by that person. So it immediately makes you listen to the discourse in a different way. And what I'm noticing, and if you haven't come across the word of Erika Zarate and Oscar Guznier at Resilience Earth in Catalonia, I highly recommend looking at it. And they also have a social co-op that they created called Myceli Social, Social Mycelium. And what they are doing in a region called La Garrocha, which is in the Pyrenees, north of Barcelona or north of Girona. It's a region that has a strong identity of place. It's very rural, and it feels disenfranchised, with rich people from Barcelona coming in to have second homes there, and it's very caught in the aftermath of the dynamics that Franco left in Spain, with the kind of suppression of the language and then the bouncing back of the language, and then the way that they, instead of doing a truth and reconciliation process, they just put an amnesty on and forced the press never to talk about it. So basically there's all sorts of trauma in that landscape. So it's like what you're describing in your area, or worse. And what are they doing? They're bringing people together through their love to place and territory. First, to just listen to that territory, to say what has shaped this place geologically over the long period, culturally over the shorter period, biologically over the times of changes in climate and all of that. And through that, to find a way where they really sit with the political spectrum, work with the things that are being voiced, rather than immediately, if one thing is being voiced, saying, he's one of them, I don't talk to those. And they really achieve that people who might have gone to kindergarten and primary school together, who then went in different paths but stayed in the region and hated each other because they were on the different sides of this extremely polarized political spectrum that runs through Spanish culture, coming to a workshop of 3 hours around territory and being in service to this territory and its people. And at the end of them, they're in tears and hugging each other. That vignette I'm sharing because I really believe, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be hurtful, and it's going to be one step forward, 2 steps back. But that process of finding a higher ground again, of healing this dynamic that we're all caught in, where we're also being played with external enemies supposedly being there and all of that. Yeah? There is a way of just saying, okay, we can get caught up in this game, like Trump comes up with some bullshit every day, so we all talk about him, or we can just not give energy there. Yeah? And do what we can do in our region to build the capacity to talk to each other, to build the capacity to listen to each other, to build the capacity to listen to the territory and listen to the future generations, and reconnect people to people and people to place. And if we do that, not with fancy 5-year projects that are funded and where we say these are the outcomes and then we're going to reach so and so many learners and blah, blah, blah. We might need to use skillful means to promise these projects to get some funding into the region, but ultimately we don't know where things are going. But if we work on this capacity to actually talk to each other again, then no matter what happens, we can align with life's regenerative impulse in that place and respond to the new conditions that we find ourselves in. But if we think what is needed is just, oh, don't you understand, if you have a paradigm shift and you believe in all the clever things we've thought about and talked about for the last 40 years in these holy halls of Guy Education, Schumacher College and Findhorn and whatever, yeah, it's not going to happen. I believe that for a long time, this bullshit that we need like some massive shift in consciousness. Of course, we need a massive shift in consciousness, but it's happening in individuals all the time. And there will always be people at different stages of, you talked about, Wilbur, it's never going to all shift to some kind of, we're all turquoise and yellow and blah, 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 second tier. We need to work with the presence of the dynamic spiral, if you want to use all that language, to basically get comfortable with that there are aggressive people that can be worked with in a friendly way. There are hierarchical people and churchy people and top-down people that can be worked with in a way. And the place where we can find common ground is in our love for territory, for the future of a place, and for our children. And then the important nuances, for me, hugely important nuances. There's a difference between I love this territory and I will defend it to my blood against anybody who's coming in from the outside. That's not the kind of love for territory that I would like to align with. It's more, I will work with anybody who's passing through this territory to be good custodians of this landscape. But if you can come together into a large group where people just love the territory, at least you have something in common. At least you can begin to have some action, and then you can have the one-on-one human relationship to have a conversation by the campfire after you've done some work together to say, do you really hate these people so much that you just have to say all Moroccans are bad? Like, don't you see? Like, basically, you can open up all these kind of xenophobia and whatever that you might have in a place through human relationships once you found a common ground. And that's why I spend so much time with the bioregional movement and really rekindling that. And I think it's a really powerful meme to repeat. Feel free to repeat it without quoting. I believe it's our evolutionary survival pattern to be bioregional custodians of place. That's how we manage to get through all of this. And as I say in the book, our skill is to be brilliant collaborators, not to be brilliant competitors. And foregrounding that at the regional scale, I think is still the name of the game, because what we don't know is what's going to happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years. But what we do know is that if we build this capacity that we can talk to each other again, that we learn from not just each other, but from place and the story of place and the biocultural dynamics of place, then we have a core capacity that allows us to make course corrections in uncertain times. I should have shorter answers, otherwise we'll never get to all your questions.
Thank you a lot. Guys, the floor is yours. The top 3 questions are by Rado, William, and Misha. I think lady first, and then the 2 of you guys, okay? So Misha, you have plenty of smaller questions embedded into a tapestry of question marks. So it's up to you how you frame it and how you wrap it up. I will share the screen just for others. It won't be helpful for you, Daniel, because the questions are either in Slovak or Czech. This is a Czechoslovak group, but it might be helpful for those who listen to the recording.
By the way, it was really interesting just when we were waiting for people to arrive, and I just listened to you talking in, I suppose it was Czech. I mean, I live in an island where there's a lot of languages being spoken at the same time, but it's always really fascinating when you listen to a language where you just don't understand a single word. but you kind of still empathically feel into what is the kind of dynamic flow of communication between the people there. So it was just lovely to listen to you talking to each other, being completely blasé about what you were talking about.
We usually listen like this to music, so
Yeah.
okay, Misha, go ahead.
Okay, hello, Daniel. I will just translate the questions I have, and just you feel free to respond whatever you want. But what I have to check somewhere else, and I have to take my glasses. So my questions were, what are the assumptions and conditions for implementation of regenerative principles on the systemic level? Where it's already taking place, so that there has been already a success in implementing regenerative principles. In what fields of human activities it is easier to do so? In what regions? Maybe there's this too much expanding, like too much hope in my questions. And does regenerative systemic approach exist on a like country level in any of countries on worldwide? And if so, what features it has, and what were the assumptions, or like what preceded?
Mm-hmm.
So by country, you mean beyond regions, state
Mm-hmm.
as
Yeah, but okay. I mean, like either regions or like just the country, because like I see like a consensus that like this is the way we want to run the country, and I'm just curious if it's possible.
Interesting question. I mean, we need to start with a sort of declaration of transparency, in the sense that I think pretty much all initiatives that connect the intention of wanting to be regenerative within a company, a bioregion, a nation, or within a sector of industry, they're all well-meaning fringe groups calling, we're working on this. They're all works in progress. Some of them more professional, some of them less professional, but even when you hear that, you could say that, yes, there is a national process in Costa Rica that is looking at regenerative development as the country's development strategy. It's a small group of people that are trying to anchor that thinking, and have done for quite some time with the government, and the government has changed to and fro since then. And at the same time, it's still going rapidly in the wrong direction. Similarly, there's now a plethora, like many regional regeneration projects that bring together quite capable people in quite long-term existing organizations that are saying, we now write it onto our flag that we want to regenerate this bioregion, map it, turn it around. But again, very rarely, or to my extent nowhere, is like the regional governor plus the leading party plus the core people in that region that hold all the industrial power and financial power saying, yes, we're behind you and let's do it, and we're there. They're different, like there are a bunch of billionaires in upper state New York that use the regenerative language, but ultimately are kind of prepping at the bioregional scale for the collapse. There are wonderful community groups in different parts of Colombia that are organizing at a territory scale to take matters more into their own hands on how to provide education, food, and cultural renewal to their region. So I was part of an initiative that started in 2016 within the Commonwealth the Secretariat in London, which is a strange club that unites 43 formerly suppressed nations and the former suppressor, the UK, into celebrating their shared history together. But it's also an interesting organization because of that, because it is really, it only exists because of colonialism, but it also celebrates that there is a way that colonialism has brought these nations into relationship with each other that could now be leveraged for positive things in the world and doesn't per se have to be negative. But you said regenerative principles, and I know that there's a whole school that is really in love with starting with first principles and following principles. I think all of that we need to hold lightly, because otherwise it becomes rigid, and regeneration is everything but rigid. Regeneration is continuous learning, but it is also a kind of values north, because it understands how life creates conditions conducive to life. So any act of regeneration is also an act of healing the system. It's an act of bringing the right patterns of relationship back that allow life to manifest health and well-being and wholeness and interconnectedness or interbeing as its core fundamental state of being. It's not like health is this ideal state that we want time need to reach. Health is the natural state of the system, and then there are blockages or patterns that we created that stop health from manifesting. And so the act that what we need to do is to peel away all the layers that make the capacity of the system to heal itself through us, of the system to know itself through us. So it's not the kind of humanity is a cancer on the planet and we don't have a role. The contrary, we have to run that tightrope between audacity and humility, between the humility of saying we don't know fully how to participate regeneratively in this nested system that we're in, but we do understand that we can't but participate in it and therefore can't but change its future. So there's a huge humility in it on the one hand, because there's fundamental uncertainty in complex systems. But then there's this huge audacity in it to say, simply because I'm actually a fruit body of this mycelium, I pop up and I'm here for a while and I have agency in the system, a lot less agency than the system itself has, but I do affect the world. And therefore, in that is audacity, is the fact that each and every one of us can make a difference. So the regenerative principles of Cara Sanford's are super helpful. I don't think that the regenerative economics principles of John Fullerton add anything more than what we've already learned through biomimicry, but they're also a conversation starter. But when regenerative economics is an example. You can gallop off into the sunset and make yourself a hero for bringing regenerative economics to the Czech Republic through an approach of this is the principle of the Capital Institute in New York that say this is how we create a regenerative economy. Or you could say, wait a minute, we don't need to create a regenerative economy. We need to understand that our economy has been blind to life's regenerative economy for far too long. Every act of nurturing that a parent does to its child, or that a child does to its aging parents, or that a neighbor does to a neighbor, every act of caring, sharing, healing, what I said earlier, is already life's regenerative economy. If we included all the work of mothers and daughters and sons and fathers and all the things that happen every day in our communities and don't have an economic slip attached to it, and understand that this caring economy has been systematically sidelined out of our economic discourse and not valued. And now we're slowly encroaching on that area to make all of it payable. If we actually, at the local, regional, or national scale, simply celebrated our capacity to be regenerative that is already there, and started a conversation about what that well-being economy is actually about, independent of the current economic system, I think we'd have a deeper conversation about regeneration. But I kind of got sidetracked and answered more than your question. Sorry. Who else?
Vladi, mikrofón nemáš pustený.
I was just saying, guys, that I feel that some of the aspects of your questions have been in some way addressed. So I invite you to refocus or just simply pass. I leave it up to you whether you want to ask the questions and whether you want to modify them just to fit the words and ideas that Daniel already said.
Yes, agreed. Hi, Daniel. Hello.
Hi, Rado.
I was going to ask you about how could we connect our common efforts for vital tomorrows even strongly, but I now think about maybe the question could be, is it important to connect our efforts from locals from all over the world and somehow bring it together to like cope like more intensively, or how to say it, and then the other question was that how could we make it attractive for everyone, but this is the part you probably already answered, I would say.
Well, that's also a really important question, and it's one that I struggle with as I kind of somehow might have spoken to in introducing what I'm doing at the moment, like what locally with the food forest, regionally with on Mallorca, and globally with kind of meme seeding and all of that. I mean, I spend a lot of time working on those networks. Like I spent a lot of time with the Global Eco-Village Network and Guy Education that was bringing together all the educators in the different eco-villages around the world. When Rob Hopkins' Transition Town initiative started to get going, I spent a lot of time giving talks in Germany to bring the kind of impulse to Germany. And I'm a great believer in life is a nested community, and nested community are organized in networks. So life is a networking activity. I would define myself as a weaver between people, between like weaver of relationships and weaver of new networks of collaboration, both locally, regionally, and globally. All of that is important, and the big caveat is that when I look at whether it's the bioregional movement or any movement, it's so easy to create that network of networks where everybody sits yet into another series of Zoom calls to talk about how they organize their thing locally. If they spend too much time in those networks, too much time in those Zoom calls, they're not organizing locally. So for me, I have a kind of strong 80-20 rule there. With a lot of things, I think 80-20 is a great sort of proportion. I try to do 20% globally and bringing the network together and all of that skillfully in the right moment when it's really needed, and it needs effort to build that larger thing. But I want to keep my focus 80% on actually the practice locally. And there, because it's all nested, locally, I also do a lot of second work. I don't necessarily stand in the community project in Andrach and talk to the fishermen about valuing the Mediterranean Sea, but I support the person who does it and bring ideas into their discourse that says it's not just about the sea, it's about the whole bioregion and all of that. So I think it's each and every one of us in different stages of our life finds giving a different focus. Like, for example, if you're a bit earlier in your learning, being in one of those networks where you're the guy who represents your region in with lots of other regions and they all talk about what they're doing, you might learn lots. And it's a great free school, like the stuff that Joe Brewer is doing with the Design School for Regenerating Earth. I think lots of people are learning really lots of useful things. They might also learn a little bit of stuff that they need to then later unlearn, but that's life. Happens to all of us. But I do struggle because I also sometimes try to pull on the mask of, am I correct with my 80-20? Am I doing the right thing? Because I'm now so regionally focused, and I'm not pretending that Mallorca has a brighter future because of what I'm doing. And I'm trying, and it's still going in the wrong direction. So maybe I should put more effort into the weaving of the network. Maybe my energy would be better placed there. I also sometimes question that, but precisely because I have to also play the game of saying, how do I act hopefully in this world so a better world is possible, and at the same time act wisely in a context that if this isn't happening, whatever happens next, I also am positioned to respond to it. And that requires me to be 80% engaged with people in my bioregion and in my place. It doesn't serve me at all if I spend the next 5 or 6 years only talking to global networks, and then the whole bloody circus collapses and we don't have any food anymore, and we have war in Europe, and we already have. And I don't know my neighbors because I've tried to save the world the whole time in online forums. So yeah, you can see it's not an easy question to answer, but a really important one to ask.
William?
Thanks a lot.
No, servus Daniel. Ich stelle meine Frage slowakisch und Vlado translated. Chcel som sa ťa, Daniel, opýtať, že ktorý z projektov, ktorý si robil, ťa chytil najviac za srdce a ktoré z regeneratívnych princípov ste tam použili, čisto koreňové, čistiárne, jednak tie architektonické veci, a jednak tie veci výtvarné, ktoré sa tam podarilo urobiť, a ktorý projekt je blízky tým, že ovplyvnil okolie tak, že si to viditeľne videl, že daný regeneratívny projekt mal aj nejaký výraznejší impact na tvoje okolie. Čiže tá otázka je, že ktorý z tých projektov, na ktorom si buď robil, alebo mal možnosť spolupracovať, ti je srdcu blízky, a možno aj prípadne nejaký link alebo nejakú informáciu o tom, aby sme možno sa mohli trošičku pozrieť na to a fokusovať na to viac. Vlado, skús.
As I understood it, it's more a question related to your past projects, which are beautifully manifested, and you have really joyful time returning to them, and they are still alive. So which of the projects simply fulfilled your expectation and hopes that you have woven into them, and they are still unfolding and thriving? And if it is possible, then maybe copy paste a link referring to those projects, so that William, he is a organic designer on a city level, so that he could perhaps have a look at them and inspire himself by that success.
Well, I mean, we already talked about one project, which is Sky Education. Education is one of those intervention points where things are very slow and you can't really guarantee how you're ultimately changing the system. But after 20 years of supporting Sky Education and doing what they're doing, and being also critically involved in helping to shape the framing that led to the 4 dimensions with social, ecological, economic, and worldview. And that's 20 years ago, where people really didn't get the worldview dimension. Now a lot more people understand how important that is. And having created a method of both having people come together in an eco-village or in a place in an urban environment over a series of weekends to do these 125 hours of human contact time with a small cohort of 25, 30 people, and really live what it means to be in community again, to live what it means to be surrounded by people who also care, who also want to make a difference, who also have a passion to do more than just live their lives, to bring community back together, to find right relationship with each other and life. That is a hugely powerful process, and I've seen what it does to people. And of course, when you do it in an eco-village for 125 hours, you come home and you hit the wall and you don't know how to bridge the gap. And then there's the online course, which takes you deeper into all of that. And then there's all the projects that have actually made a huge difference in lots of countries. Like if you come to Brazil, there's a thin layer of the consciously aware, somewhat socially privileged, not super rich people, but educated people that use their privilege in service to Brazilian society. And this layer, very thin layer of Brazilian society in almost every major city of Brazil has done the Gaia education course, and they call themselves Gaianos. And when they move from one place to another, they look up where the Gaianos are and they meet them, and they have a network, and they have a network of people that they can talk to and know what they know without ever having talked to them. They don't need to argue about compost toilets or spiral dynamics or solar panels or biomatrix water and all those things, because they know all of that has been introduced to everybody who's done the course. And so for me, that whole ecosystem that we created there and that we're continuing to create is a massive success story that has changed the world. And I work with people who I first met 15, 20 years ago as young learners in this. I was younger, they were younger, and now we're all 15, 20 years more experienced, and we're professionals in our fields, and we're working still together. So that's one thing. Then an offshoot from that is also really wonderful, and I'll put the link into the comments later, is if you search for the impossible future, or El Futuro Imposible. This is a project that was run by initially two Argentinian, what were they? Advertising people. Like they made short 90 seconds to 4-minute, 5-minute clips for Toyota and all those companies to sell their products. And then they pivoted and said, we're not going to use our skill to keep the consumption model going. We're going to create a little NGO that only works with NGOs, using our skills to help NGOs to communicate their stuff, which is called Implicate. Wonderful business. They're doing really beautiful work. And these people, as a passion project, decided that they wanted to put the Gaia education curriculum into a documentary. And out of that, 12 years later, with lots of different turns, this Il Futuro Imposible came about. And it's a wonderful project that if anybody has the energy to translate it into Czech and get it into your local TV station, it's amazing, because they've anyway, look at the website. What else have I done where I feel it's been worth it? I mean, just seeing what happens here on Mallorca. Like I helped this 1,000-hectare estate to have some core funding for the next few years. It's not guaranteed forever, but I'm still working on building the framework that land will be stewarded and steward-owned in perpetuity. That's looking positive. That's the Fundación, the Mediterranean Wildlife Foundation, Fundación Vida Silvestre Mediterránea. Educationally, I've done a lot of projects. Some of them didn't live as long as Guy Education, but also had impact. Currently, I'm involved with one of the world's leading universities, ETH Zurich, and helping them to create, like we created a MOOC, a massive open online course series that by now has been taken by over 10,000 people from 115 countries or so, and it's only been around for 3 or 4 years. And again, it's not necessarily as deep as I would like to take people, but it's a wonderful introduction in lots of different areas, and it's trying to build a very difficult bridge to build, which is top-level science and engineering. So like the MIT of Europe, one of the few universities in Europe that is among the top 10 universities in the world, to have a university like that talk about have even a course on the program that talks about multiple ways of knowing, that brings Nora Bateson and Bayo Akomolafe and David Abram and all those people into conversations with engineers, that values indigenous knowledge in a new context as not something to add on to the scientific engineering knowledge, but something that is in its own right valid, and bring those together. I think, again, if you look up ETH Zurich Designing Regenerative and Resilient Systems program, that's a success, I would say. And there are probably lots of others that I'm not thinking of. But as a general statement, maybe anything to do with regional or national governments has not really led to fruitful long-term projects that can still be pointed at. But again, even those projects, like for example, that Commonwealth, we started with a big bang in 2016, had a meeting that cost a shed lot of money, brought some of the most amazing people on the planet together in London at Marlborough House under regenerative development to reverse climate change. We could have changed the discourse and done some amazing work, starting with the 54 nations of the Commonwealth Secretariat. But politics took its toll, and there's still some beautiful things that are still part of the ongoing process that initiated. And people learned something in the process. That's like often the hidden part of the question you were asking, is that even our greatest failures can lead to wonderful successes. And we really need to pay attention to that. Like, to give you a vignette, in 2009, I was the director or co-director of Findhorn College, and somehow got contacted by a group of people that ran a conference in Belo Horizonte in Brazil that was called the 2020 Climate Leadership Campaign. This was in 2009. So 11 years to make a difference for the planet on climate leadership. It was Jim Garrison, who had started the Green Cross with Mikhail Gorbachev and had started the State of the World Forum conferences, and he was a heavy hitter in his own age. And he pulled all these people together. And we had an amazing meeting in Belo Horizonte. And then there was another meeting in America. And then very shortly after, the whole initiative went into a scandal. Some money was embezzled. The whole thing just fell apart. But the relationships that were built at that first conference in Belo Horizonte changed my life. Not just once, but 3 times. Years later, I rekindled, using that connection, a storyline from that conference, and took that to a success somewhere else. And so just that little vignette to tell you, it's not just the projects that you can point at that have a website that say this was amazing and it's still amazing, but all our failures, and this is the flip into the regenerative paradigm. When we talk about regenerative engineering and regenerative design and regenerative architecture, we're still so stuck on the deliverable, the outcome, the thing that we're working on and then handing over to the client. That is wrong from the beginning if you really want to be regenerative. Of course, you want to do an outcome and you want it to have a regenerative impact, and it's a wonderful regenerative design. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you think from the beginning, how to create that final result in a way that it leaves a fundamental change in everybody that got touched by that process. It leaves something inside of people rather than a physical artifact that you got paid for. Then you're really working regeneratively. Anyway, again, an answer that expanded on the question.
Ďakujem.
Kubo, we are nearing to your flood of questions, and other guys, there is a insight for you. Those who ask a lot of questions will get a lot of answers. So, Kubov, make a choice. Which of those questions you would like to ask, which are still relevant? I would like to invite you to start with the one unasked question, or the question that is not asked so often. I think it's quite funny, and maybe Daniel would appreciate it. Oh, okay. So anyone else? Kubov is now of the transition. So anyone who has a question, please.
Can I voice my question?
Mhm.
My questions? Thank you. Hi, Daniel. I have like 3 questions, but they are connected from my point of view. My question is how to create a regenerative and ecocentric culture in an egocentric society. And I'm building on the knowledge of Bill Plotkin, which I'm reading right now. I'm in a eco art therapy course right now. And we are reading through this book, so we are learning about the human development of the psyche and our capacity to create.
Soulcraft, or which book are you reading? Soulcraft or?
No. It's called Příroda lidská duše in Czech, so it will be Nature and the Human Soul.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this one. It's a quite big book.
Yeah.
And the next question is like how to create some lightweight formats for meetings of people that are full with humanity, but at the same time have common impact for a real systemic change.
Mhm.
And the last part of this fractal is how to develop a team or a community of my village in the principles of regeneration. And I'm really actually interested in like where to put the most energy, because I have spent 5 or 7 years in trying to understand systemically and really overthink how to change things around me. Through sustainability and regeneration, and I'm also studying the DRRS at ETH Zurich with Tobias. But right now, after the 1 year of the eco art therapy course, I see that the main change is maybe there, helping people to work through their trauma and to learn about their own gifts that they can bring to this world. And maybe we don't have to overthink it too much. So sorry for this complicated question, but
No,
it is all connected for me.
I hear the connections. So wonderful question.
Okay, thank you.
And for me, it's the answer is in the first question for all of them almost. And you're right. Like again, the personal vignette, when I went through a bit of a dark night of the soul just after the pandemic, and with like having to move house and start a new project, and my daughter starting school, and like too many things at once. And I kind of lost for a while the capacity to be positive about a world that is so fundamentally inviting us to be negative about where things are going. And in that dark night of the soul, I asked myself, what is it that I still know, that I can still do, that is in any way, in any shape, meaningful in this uncertainty of where things are going? And I came back to where you started, like to the work of Bill Plotkin, or the work of the way of, like, Gigi Coyle is my mentor in this, the way of counsel, the School of Lost Borders in California. What was previously called the Ojai Foundation, which brought kind of the way of counsel to schools and to boardrooms and to prisons and to veterans. And it's a fundamentally human way. It's the ancient way of sitting in the circle, speaking from the heart, listening from the heart, keeping it to the essence, and currently spacing on the fourth invitation of the way of counsel, but it doesn't matter. The main point is that way of sitting in circle around the fire, really listening to what needs to be spoken for collective learning and trauma healing to take place. That is what we've been doing as regenerative presence of place. That's what we've been doing to keep the North Star of being in right relationship to each other and our place. So you're absolutely right that this whole systems change thing can be overthought massively. Small acupuncture interventions with rhythmicity, with like, even if in your, this is your second question or the third one, in your area, think of the people who really care and invite them every Sunday of the first Sunday of the month to come to a nice place, your place or somebody else's place, to sit in circle. Invite them into trying it for a year, to give it rhythmicity, that the same people meet regularly. Invite them to commit to saying, when you come for 90 minutes, don't come late, don't leave early. And create a little tribe. And all you have to do is to think of a question for each one of those meetings, and a deep question where people can share. And what will happen is that just by meeting in this way, you will build a tribe, you will build a set of relationships, you will build a angle point which can change things in your community. So I think that this reconnecting with life's regenerative impulse is this capability of sitting in the circle of, if you've been in this work, you will have had this experience when in the circle you find yourself voicing a level of wisdom and insight as you're speaking that you didn't have before you sat down in that circle. And you'd actually have an embodied experience of something coming from the collective through you. And that's huge. Because if you have that experience, everything changes. And so I think that particular work, and also our current awareness that if we do not name the traumas, we don't need to kind of get overly spiraling around our own belly button and our own trauma and our own grief and all, we were so poor me kind of scenarios. But the actual naming of the trauma and collectively holding it, even just naming it, that's another thing about counsel. It allows people, because it's speaking from the heart and listening from the heart, it allows people to share these core feelings that we all have that so fundamentally jar with the society we've been brought up in, that we don't share them, and therefore we think we're a bit weird. And when you're in counsel, hear somebody else share a feeling that you've also had, it gives you permission to have that feeling. And that in itself is already trauma healing. So yeah, I think this work, like as it's coming back to my own vignette, like increasingly the sort of strategist and the overthinker of me says, no, that can't be it. Sitting with 15, 20 people for 90 minutes at a time, or doing a vision quest with 15 or 12 or 15 people for 12 days out there on the land. How am I going to make change with that? Yeah, it's a different type of change, but the change that happens in those 12 people is a lifelong change that really fundamentally re-grounds them in a different way of being. And ultimately, what we need to change is ways of being, and then the rest changes. I don't know if I answered all the questions. Remind me of if there was a question I didn't answer, remind me.
No, thank you. That was the main point. Thank you.
It's so weird. being in the position of being asked questions, because you always end up having this sense that you have to have an answer for every question. And it's also kind of important to model not knowing. And so that means whatever I'm saying, just take it with a grain of salt. I'm only one of us trying to make sense of this whole mess.
Okay. Hi, Daniel, Kubo, Michal, Kubo here. Nice to meet you. So I have several questions, but two are, one is the most voted and one is a little bit special. So the first one is, according to you, what are the most effective entry points into introduction of regenerative design into already existing city structures?
City structures. Well, any kind of city urban planner has a beautiful inroad to all of this, which is a historical inroad. Happens, if you look into the history of town planning, you will find that Patrick Geddes is considered to be one of the founding fathers of town planning as a discipline. Patrick Geddes was a biologist, and Patrick Geddes wrote a book in 1910 called Cities in Evolution. And if you look at what he was talking about then, and if you look at what he actually did in Edinburgh with the Old Town of Edinburgh and through the Edinburgh Festival that still exists today, this man is an exemplary historic case study to show us how to do town planning in a bioregional context with the people in that place properly. What did Geddes do? Like, Geddes was the first to suggest that he created something called the valley section, which was a simple thinking tool to say, where are the mountains, where's the sea, where's the river that connects the mountains to the sea, and where's the city, our city, in relationship to that landscape. And then, of course, this is like 100 years ago, and resource base was different, was more regionalized and all of that. He was actually inviting people to say, okay, where do we get our resources from? What is nurturing this city? What is driving the city's metabolism? And then he invited people to map the region, hydrology, flora, fauna, and then overlay these maps to understand where healthy development could actually happen, that was a compromise between human affairs and the living ecosystems dynamics and the geological dynamics and the soil dynamics of that place. And that thinking was later picked up through a post-war online course that was given by a student of Geddes, by Ian McHarg, who wrote the book Dizajn with Nature and was an American, really influential American landscape architect and town planner. And he developed this technique further, and that technique then was translated into GIS, the Geographic Information System. So one place to start is to look at what did Geddes do back then. And one of the things is that he connected to the biogeophysical reality of the place and looked at town planning within that context, which is basically a bioregional approach to town planning. And one book that you, if you're not aware of it, that you might find interesting is Herbert Girardet's book on regenerative cities that actually came out in 2015 before my book came out. And if you look up Regenerative Cities World Future Council PDF, then you will find a document that summarizes Herbert Girardet's book in 20 pages and has some nice graphics in it. But one last time, trying to get back to Geddes, Geddes really understood how to work with cities. Like, he moved into the old town, like he taught at Dundee University, but he moved into the old town of Edinburgh, which was pretty dodgy at the time, full of prostitutes and thieves and whatever. And he developed the concept of a student union. He said, here's an old big house that isn't being used. Why don't we get the students that can't afford expensive rent all to come together and live here? And me and my wife will help run that. through that, he started basically a gentrification process in the old town that then allowed with the students and the people of that neighborhood to start painting like empty lots white and planting community gardens. And he literally did what we would now talk community regeneration participation processes. And then he created something that still exists today, which is the Outlook Tower. If you walk up the Royal Mile of Edinburgh towards the castle, on the right-hand side, there's a building called the Outlook Tower. And Geddes had this brilliant idea of creating a public museum there in which, and this is like in the early 1900s, you could walk into the ground floor and it was a exhibition of the world. And then you took one floor up and it was an exhibition of Europe. And then you took one floor up and it was an exhibition of Great Britain. And then you took one floor up and it was an exhibition of Scotland. And then on the top floor was a camera obscura, one of those old techniques where you can create a round picture on the ceiling that reflects the area around you. So it was fancy technology of the time where people could see the city of Edinburgh. And what did that do? In one simple exercise of walking up that tower and walking back down that tower, it grounded people into one thing that people do not understand to this day, which is scale linking design. That everything we do in one place also affects the planet, and everything that's done on the planet also affects the place. This consciousness. And so, yeah, I think those kind of interventions change how we perceive planning in the modern day. And so I would take a look at Geddes. If you put Patrick Geddes, Danielom Wahlom, Medium into a search engine, you'll find lots of articles about it.
Anyone?
Very interesting.
Yeah, go.
Hello?
No, go ahead.
And do have a look at that Regenerative Cities World Future Council document. That's also really good.
Yeah, thank you. I have some special question. So it is kind of meta question. What questions about your book or about regenerative cultures in general you desire or aspire to get from people, but only rarely people are asking it? And now is your time that you can answer.
That's a good question. It's a bit hard and a bit late in the day to come up with a good answer for that one, but I think that there's a question that doesn't get answered, or an issue that doesn't get talked about often enough, which is a bit linked to what was he? So Michael was saying, Soulcraft. I need to put my glasses on, otherwise I can't read your names.
Okay, it was Lukáš.
Lukáš, yeah. How, like, you can get to this in different ways with different questions, but it is really, on the one hand, for me, it's an answer of how do we act with confidence and service to life, even when we know that we can't guarantee that our actions will truly be of service. And how do we understand our own agency in the context of the system we're embedded in, and with that also the role of collapse and mortality. It's kind of a cluster of questions that I find that we don't often talk about. For me, our fear of mortality and our misunderstanding of what life is at the core of why we create degenerative systems. If we fully take a system biologist's understanding of life as a planetary process that is much more about terraforming and much less about individuals and species than our current storytelling makes us believe, then we can understand that all the wisdom traditions that speak about eternal life never promised one woman or man living forever. They always try to remind us that life lives forever. And that because we're expressions of life, to a certain extent, we're all immortal. We're temporary expressions of that process that has been going on for a very long time. And for me, that lets me act differently in the world, to be aligned with that, and also to understand that, like Goethe said this beautifully, death is life's ingenious way of creating plenty of life. Death is life's ingenious way to create plenty of life. And that is also true with collapse. It's also true with any good project, any good idea, anything we hold on to dearly that needs to keep going because we're attached to it. When everything is seen in that larger context, you can begin to see that even in the collapse, even in the calamity, even in the suffering, is a release into a larger vitality. And for me, that's probably a question we don't often talk about. And the related bit is the one that is so common in our circles, our wider circles. I'm putting a bit of assumption here, but I think it's a founded assumption. People love this idea of being a change maker. How can I be a social change agent? How can I be a change maker? How can I? And where in the system is the angle point? How do we do the leveraging? Oh, what network or strategy can we come up with that we change the system? And I love it, and I've been there, and I'm still there, and it's a good conversation to have, but it's a much more powerful conversation to have when we understand that the agency of the system itself, or the nested systems itself, for good and for bad, is also there and is also creating future. And we're now at a point in human history where we're barking up the wrong tree trying to be change makers. The change is coming, and it's coming hard and fast. And there's very little we can do about it. But we can ready ourselves for the change and dance with it and be there as communities and respond to it one day at a time, one step at a time. And that's only really landing in us when we pay attention to what the Indians used to call karma, which is that with all our systems change energy that Ashoka has planted into our minds as being so sexy to have, the system itself, life itself, is the largest change agent. And that's where the hope is. Because on the one hand, the fucked up system we created is going to keep doing what it does best, fucking things up. But life also is going to keep doing what it does best, regenerating. And our choice is to align with that process.
We have maybe space for 2 more questions. So if anyone feels.
I would ask that what element, what terminology think related to regenerative cultures do you consider to be the most not understood by practitioners but by learners, and why?
Sorry, what say the first part of the question again? What particular, like which point do I think is the most common mistake? Or sorry.
like in regenerative cultures, there's a lot of things and some elements. It may be how we call these elements or the elements themselves. But what is most misunderstood?
I think the most misunderstood. Yeah, I think I think I already mentioned that. Like, for me, the most common misunderstanding is the framing of regeneration as something new, as something that you just have to learn from the right people and then you can do it. And the way that it leads people to sell regeneration as the new course that you need to do with so and so in order to get ahead in this game where everybody is suddenly putting that adjective regenerative to their professional description. And so that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what regeneration is all about. And what's aligned with it with regard to regenerative cultures is a language where people use, and I kind of probably did it in parts of the book myself, otherwise it wouldn't have resulted in people using the language like that, where regenerative cultures are sort of portrayed as this future utopia that if we just all did the right thing and followed all the right rules and asked all the 250 questions that are in Danielom Wahlom's book, then we will one day create the future utopia of a regenerative culture. And that's wrong. And I'm probably to blame that people are talking in that way. We need to see that regeneration is already happening everywhere. And we need to foster that through bringing people into relationships and celebrating life's capacity to create conditions conducive for more life to flourish, and practice our own capacity to, within the limits of our own knowing, be in service to that process and keep learning and keep unlearning, keep asking, what is the fundamental assumption that I believe about reality that I might need to question so I can come to the next level of participating in all of this. So yeah, I think that it's the two things is like selling regeneration as something new or pretending that regenerative cultures is a utopia yet to be built rather than a reality to be unveiled, to be nurtured, to be. It's like I see it much more like it's a set of ambers. When you wake up and it's 4 o'clock in the morning and you fell asleep around the campfire and there's just a few embers left that with the white still over it, and you start fanning it and slowly the flame comes back. And I think in all our communities and all our villages and cultures and bioregions, these ambers are there. And our job is to give them oxygen.
Can I have one more? Okay, Barbara, take your time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so first of all, Daniel, thank you very much. It's everything you say, it's just so nourishing and inspiring. Also, Vlado, thank you for organizing this. And yeah, so my question is, sure, I do agree that it is already happening, but yet I can see so many communities and so many cultural activists and just people who care struggling because of the time. And you know it yourself, you know, you're a father and a successful man who has just too many activities to engage in. And then, like Vlado said, there's this polarization and just this, struggle to maybe be someone, do something, you know, save something. I don't know, like all this shit that, you know, it's easy to forget listening to you, but it's still real in normal life. And so my question is, what do you think? What kind of initiatives, what kind of cooperations are actually those who succeed? And I do want to also acknowledge that I really liked when you said that it's maybe not important to succeed, that you can still inspire someone not even knowing. So failures are also important in this way. But yet I do want to understand, how can these people who care enlarge the possibility that their initiative will actually be nourishing for themselves and for the community they want to have an impact on?
Yeah, it's a real tricky one, because basically the playing field we're doing all of this in somehow preconditions even people who want to collaborate, who want to celebrate in a kind of mudita kind of way the brilliance of everybody in the field. We still fall back into the kind of, yeah, but I also need to provide for my family, and if that guy gets that job and I don't get it, and so that is to simply acknowledge that, and to be more transparent about it, and to almost be kind of name it in a kind of jokey way, so it's out in the air, and say, how do we get over this? Like, how do I stop feeling this impulse of competition with you or that organization or that player in the local bioregion? And like, for me, it's a constant daily practice. Like, in the bioregional field, there's a whole bunch of people where I kind of cringe. Like, I hate Ashoka and the way that they're involved in the bioregioning weaving labs and infiltrate their energy there. It's wrong. It shouldn't be there. But at the same time, I see that there's lots of really wonderful people doing things in that initiative, and they're really learning something. And so how do I celebrate it and still be honest that there's some shadow there? And the similar, like Joe Brewer, I mentioned him before, like, there is a messianic, I am going to change the world, Joe Brewer is going to change the world messaging that is going on there, that will belly flop the entire initiative if he's not careful. And at the same time, he's doing wonderful work for a lot of people where they're learning stuff. And even like the Department of Bioregions in Cascadia, their language is so the old fighting language of bioregionalism and schism and radical departure from that. I empathize with that energy. I've been there at points in my life myself, and I acknowledge that people are full of that energy. But I think it's dangerous. And so, why do I go into all of that as an answer to your question? Is it's not easy to do this globally or locally. The more you can, like, like, in full transparency, I sometimes ask myself the question, how would I practice even more what I preach? How would I do what I do more in the context of a kind of second level cooperative? And that's why I'm so enthused with the work of Erika Zarate and Oscar Guzny in Resilience Earth in Catalonia, because I think that they're really experimenting valiantly, daringly, with something that is an answer to your question, that is really trying to build a new pattern. And I know that, for example, where we are, like in Balearics, the cooperative law is slightly different than in Catalonia. But what they can do in Catalonia with a second order cooperative is they can bring small businesses, self-employed people, and small NGOs all into a kind of second order network of collaboration, where you don't have to be a cooperative to be a member of a second order cooperative. And that begins to, and if you focus that around the healing of the territory, and you link it to the capacity to invest collectively in innovation in that cooperative, it begins to create a different way of doing things. And so as I'm still in this process of trying to also to reposition how I work in the world, because I increasingly ask myself, like, Like there's a part of me who would just like to be a farmer, who would just like to plant more trees and expand this regenerative food forest concept. But I know it's not really going to change the world, and it's probably not going to feed my family at the level that I've grown accustomed to giving webinars and charging money for it. But I would like to step, like it's, you know, when you shift your gravity from one foot to the other, like I don't think we can make that step out of this world that has that dynamic that you were speaking to fully yet, but we can put a little bit more weight on the foot that is in the other world that is trying to build this collaborative network. And I think in there is paying attention of what you do with even the little bit of excess money you've got. Like many people don't have vast amounts to invest in a big project. I don't. But how do I bank with my money? Are there local community investment vehicles where I can actually put a little bit of money into something that I believe in, and through that meet people? Like to really start to begin to understand that what for some people seems terribly inconvenient, like to be member of a electric car pool and have to go once a month to a community meeting. You can think of it as, oh, I need to go once a month to a community meeting, or you can stop complaining about, oh, I feel so lonely in my community. I don't hardly know anybody and I never really meet people. Go to the community meeting of your carpool, and it's the same as the council circle earlier. It creates rhythmicity, meeting the same people over a year or 2 years, once a month or once every 2 months. And simply by doing that, you build human webs of relationship that can maybe overcome these really uncomfortable patterns that still are everywhere. Is that an answer to your question, Barbara? Sort of.
Lukáš, if you want, you can have the last question.
Perfect, thank you. Daniel, you've mentioned that you yourself have that you've also went through the phase of change making and systems change, and what Ashoka is preaching. I also have, or I'm one of the leaders of an association of 100 organizations here in Czechia that right now is very much excited about systemic change and lobbying and public affairs and so on. And I see that from 2030 there will be regenerative development goals by UN. So it is a pattern that maybe we are going through, and what can we, or what have you learned from your own journey into this area of trying to make the world a better place? And what led you to like change the strategy? What can, like, how can we like inspire, get inspiration from this?
Well, I mean, it's not a friend of mine in Austria created a network quite a few years ago. He originally came out of the eco-village movement and a little bit out of the kind of council and vision quest movement. And he was going to call it something about change makers, and then he had this issue that, and he ended up calling it pioneers of change. And it's sort of slightly different, because if you try out change in pioneering initiatives, you're not pretending that you're like the clever one who's engineering making the change, and even that is possible. Like, we can make change. It's not like it's not an either or, but I think the importance in this framing is to simply ask that question. It's again almost like an 80-20 again. Like our capacity is only 20% of we can make change. The system and that we're embedded in, the kind of ongoing change that has intergenerational dimensions and historic dimensions and trauma dimensions and resource dimensions and biophysical climate dimensions. There are certain changes that are already in process that there's not so much we can do about them. And so I think we will be more effective as change makers if we pay more attention to how the system will change us. And if we have a look at Nora Bateson's paper on readying. This whole notion of, rather than making the change, how do I ready myself in the context of change that is no longer avoidable? And that it does something. It changes how do we actually work with change. In a similar way, there's a lot of sort of pop culture fancy, like everybody likes to use the word emergence and organic emergence and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it's a little bit fluffy and not really. And Nora invites us in a beautiful way into, like, again, just paying attention not to just what is emerging, but also what is submerging. What are the patterns that no longer serve, that need to be composted, and to really find a deeper dialogue in that. Like the danger of, like, well, you asked me about my learning. My learning is always watch your own arrogance, that you know better than others. Watch your own, like it's the sort of, my learning is always about humility, about also about privilege. Like, even so much of what I've just shared with you over the last 2 hours comes out of the context that is my cultural context, and that is definitely not free of privilege. There's a lot of privilege there. And of course, we all in different ways have privileges, and they're sometimes difficult to hand over. You can't just get rid of them. The question is, what do we do with the privilege? Do we use it in service to a larger process that is more than ourselves? And without falling into the caveat, and maybe I'll end on that, because that's something that I often end on in conversations when people ask me, oh, you have all these questions. What are the questions you can leave us with? I often come back to what I call, or a friend of mine actually calls it the triethica. This idea that if you only ask 3 questions to guide your own path into the future as a change agent, a pioneer of change, a change maker, or whatever you want to call yourself, ask with every major decision in your life 3 questions. Does it serve myself? Does it serve my community? And does it serve life? And the interesting thing is that in some contexts, people find it really hard to ask the question, does it serve my community and does it serve life? They're very used to asking the question, does it serve myself? How do I make a good business out of that, make lots of money? And then in other circles, I would venture to guess more the circles we're all in, asking the first question is almost impossible. People find it really hard to say, does it serve myself? Because they're so into the kind of, I'm here to serve humanity, I'm a change maker, I will burn myself out to make a difference in this world. And the wisdom of this, and it's really ancient wisdom, that these 3 questions are in every circle way culture around the planet, if you pay attention to them. The capacity to say, how does this serve myself in ways that I can then serve my community in life in the long run? And the daily practice of, when you make those decisions, and this is the crunch bit here, find at least 2 good answers for each one of those 3 questions. It's easy to find, depending on what the business or the idea is, it's easy to find out, this serves myself, this serves myself, but you have to find answers, good answers for all 3, and on that basis make the decision. And I find that it's a really beautiful little gift that you can give people as a daily practice, to say, okay, as I have to make core decisions, I'll take the time to just note down 2 good answers to those 3 questions, and it helps me make decisions. This has been really lovely, and I was just wondering, because this is being recorded and all, what are you going to do with the recording, and how do people feel about sharing it somewhere so other people can listen to it. I don't know what was your idea, Vladimir, to do with the recording?
If it is okay with all of you, I would like to send both the YouTube video, but maybe it will be more interesting for you to have the file itself and you can use it as you want, just to serve it the purpose you see it's the most fitting way. So
I'm perfectly fine to keep it personal if people would prefer that. I'm happy with you to share it somewhere, and then I can amplify it and share it if you tell me the link. I'm also happy to, like I have this ongoing video channel called Voices of the Regeneration, and sometimes like I have a conversation that I had with people at Schumacher College that I put there as well. So if I could also put it there, but I really like think about it and decide as a group later. You don't have to decide now, but I'm just offering from my perspective, we can share it with others, but it's also absolutely fine if you'd rather keep it for yourselves. But it's been really lovely to meet you all, and I mean, it's been a bit in the sense of you've only asked questions. I would have liked to hear also your own opinions and stuff, but we can't squeeze everything into 2 hours. And Vlado, again, thank you so much for doing the work you're doing. I mean, this is like this group would have not come together without you, and the book wouldn't have been translated without you. So and it's and you also didn't do that to make yourself rich. That's for sure. So thank you for being in service in that way. Yeah.
thank you, Daniel. I'm deeply aware of your hard day's work, and despite of that, you prepared this beautiful fest of your kind wisdom for all of us. Basically, you continue you prolonged the journey that we had with you through the book. So once again, great, thank you. And hopefully next time we will meet the other way around. You might ask the question and we will provide some answers. Hope might be the next questions.
And I hope give Michal some love that he finally gets out that Slovak edition, because it's really beautiful. Like I mean, he's put so much effort into it. It's like the graphic design is a work of art in itself. It's guiding people in a different way through the material. So if anybody has a bit of energy to give him some support that the Slovak edition comes out, it would be lovely.
Hopefully this autumn, but that's just the last news I have.
Okay, I'll write to him and encourage him.
Yeah.
Lots of love. Have a lovely evening, and again, thank you all for even caring enough to join this group and spend 2 hours talking about what we just talked about.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Very much.
Bye.
You.
Bye.
Much.